So today, we're analysing the book on a world that has been just completely transformed, not just by the internet itself, but by this relentless kind of invisible stream of data that flows from it. We're talking about digital journalism and specifically how measuring clicks and page views and all that, how it fundamentally reshapes what it means to be a journalist day to day.
It's such a profound case study. I mean, you're looking at the rationalization of creative work in real time. And this pressure isn't new. But the scale of the measurement we have now, it's unprecedented. And to really set the stage for this, you have to go back to this flashpoint in 2011. I'm talking about the leaked management document known as the AOL Way.
Okay, yes, the AOL way. This was what basically a playbook, the editorial staff on how to create profitable media content. And what laid out was at the time really jarring for people.
Oh, absolutely. It showed that management genuinely believed journalism could be almost entirely systematized, broken down into a process to maximize traffic and, of course, revenue. They set these just staggering expectations. Writers were supposed to produce 5 to 10 stories per day,
And each one had to be, quote, profitable, which meant it had to get at least 7,000 page views.
right? Which was a huge jump from the company's average at the time, which was like 1,500.
And the instructions were just so specific, it completely cut out traditional editorial judgment. They had a literal flowchart. And the example that everyone remembers is, if Macaulay Culkin and Mila Kunis are trending because they broke up, the instruction was literally write story about Macaulay Culkin and Mila Kunis.
And what's so critical to understand here is that this 21st century data-driven directive, it connects directly to a managerial playbook from a century ago. We're talking about Frederick Taylor's scientific management, Taylorism from 1911.
Okay, but that seems, a little reductive. Taylorism was about timing workers loading iron onto railway cars. Journalism needs creativity, nuance, judgment. How can you compare a reporter's complex work to a factory job? Is that really the right framework?
It is, and here's why. It's because of Taylorism's score function, which is to get maximum efficiency by breaking labor down into small, interchangeable steps. And crucially, it separates the conception of the work, the planning which management does, from the road execution of the work which the workers do. Historically, knowledge workers, reporters, professors, planners, they were insulated from this. They needed autonomy. And more importantly, the data just wasn't there to measure their output.
But now it is. With every click, every second of engaged time being tracked, that insulation is just dissolving.
Exactly. Metrics are the tool that finally lets management apply that scalpel to knowledge work. So, our mission for this deep dive is to look at the tools themselves, like the analytics platform Chartbeat, and then compare how two really different newsrooms, the New York Times and the very transparent Gawker Media, how they both handled this new reality.
Okay, so let's start with Chartbeat. It's sold as this, high-tech tool for understanding the audience, but it's also a pretty powerful form of managerial discipline, right? Designed to extract productivity. And it works because it doesn't feel like a boss standing over your shoulder. It feels like a game.
Yes. And journalists get sucked into what they themselves called the traffic game. Chartbeat's whole interface is key. It gives you instant feedback, these constantly updating scores on these big immersive dashboards. And critically, it uses intermittent reinforcement variable rewards. You get that surprise viral hit out of nowhere, and that's the thing that hooks you. Oh, wow. And there's actual data showing how addictive this is. Gawker staff said they consulted Chartbeat with compulsive frequency. There's this one anecdote from a writer who said, I'm quoting here, "I'm actually concerned by the extent to which my emotional well-being is dictated by the number of hits on my posts. I talked to my therapist about it."
Wow, talking to your therapist about page views? That really suggests the traffic game isn't just about work anymore. It's fundamentally changing a journalist's sense of self-worth. It's all validated externally by these numbers, and the feedback was live, right instant.
That immediacy leads to this practice they call grinding, which is basically the blogging version of high-volume, low-margin content. It's repetitive, low-risk stuff you do for a guaranteed but minimal reward. It's like stocking the shelves instead of betting on one big blockbuster. Editors would literally tell writers you literally just have to post more.
And posting more. It guarantees a certain traffic floor which can be monetized. But the real psychological hook is the hope for that huge payoff. You're buying lottery tickets hoping for a surprise viral hit. One writer put it perfectly. He said going viral is more or less like playing the lottery. The more lottery tickets you buy, the more likely you are to hit it big.
But here's the crucial consequence that often gets missed: the non-monetary cost. All this time spent grinding, writing quick, aggregated posts. That's time you cannot spend on, longer, slower, reported-out features. So you end up with a real loss to journalistic quality, and I'd already do, to civic life. It creates a kind of punishing silence on important topics that don't get quick clicks.
And that tension, that's what brings us to the core problem of this Moneyball mindset, this belief that data is always better than intuitive judgment. But in journalism, the metrics are so often ambiguous.
Oh, they're incredibly messy. A New York Times reporter voiced this perfectly. He was looking at two stories and asked, if one story gets 425,000 hits and another one gets 372,000, is that meaningful? That difference? And that really gets at the first of two big uncertainties journalists have to deal with, meaning uncertainty.
Right? Meaning uncertainty is just asking, what do these numbers even mean? A story's traffic is affected by way too many variables to just, draw a simple conclusion. The author, the time of day where it is on the homepage, a sudden algorithm change at Facebook, some other huge news event that just breaks.
Exactly. You could publish the most amazing, deeply reported investigation, but if it goes live an hour after a massive national scandal breaks, its numbers will look terrible. It's so hard to separate causation from correlation.
Which leads right to the second uncertainty, action uncertainty. Okay, so you have the numbers, but what are you supposed to do about them? Gawker writers would say this all the time, that this isn't a switch. There's not a formula. You can't just replicate a hit. The variables always change.
So to cope with all this ambiguity, this lack of a clear formula, journalists start to develop folk theories. These are sort of, collectively shared, non-expert explanations they use to make sense of the chaos.
Yes, and they're essential for just coping psychologically. You see things like the belief that certain topics are just reliable click-getters. Like people love unhinged letters, unhinged sorority girl, unhinged bride, or a simple one like bad traffic is almost always a bad headline. It's a way to impose order.
And when a story fails, when it doesn't hit its numbers, how do they deal with that emotionally? They turn to what researchers call the algorithmic imaginary. You hear writers saying things like, sometimes I'm just like, you know what? The internet wasn't in the mood for this today. I think that's totally a thing.
That phrase is fascinating to me. The internet wasn't in the mood. It's a self-care mechanism, isn't it? It absolves the journalist of personal failure because they've basically defined the internet, or the algorithm, as this moody, unknowable being whose tastes are out of their control.
They're powerless against these huge platforms like Facebook and Google, so they give themselves a break from that constant pressure. The ambiguity, in a weird way, provides a necessary emotional escape hatch.
So if journalists are having to rationalize their work by blaming the internet's mood, that kind of emotional and even ethical stress has to filter up to management. How did the organizations themselves try to manage that risk?
And that's where we get into newsroom strategy. These metrics forced this unavoidable collision between commercial goals and editorial integrity. For years, you had the wall, the sacred separation between the business aside and the newsroom. Digital metrics just tore that down.
South, to deal with this risk of ethical contamination, newsrooms created a hierarchy of metrics. At the very bottom, you have what they call dirty data. The classic example is the raw page view. Page views were seen as dirty because they encouraged clickbait. Every click counts the same, no matter how long the person stays or where they came from.
Right? And the path to redemption, journalistically speaking, was through the clean or golden metrics. And this is where Chartbeat really found its niche with things like engage time and recirculation.
Exactly. Engage time was seen as clean because it's hard to fake. A bot can generate a page view, but engage time requires a real human paying sustained attention. And this metric was positioned as something that aligns business goals with quality journalism. Chartbeat even argued its tools were a subsidy for serious reporting to ensure the journalist that wants to investigate the corrupt politician actually has the means to do so.
That's a very compelling pitch. And what about recirculation? What did that tell them?
Recirculation is the percentage of readers who, after finishing one article, click on another article on the same site. So it's not just that they stayed on the page, it signals the content was good enough to make them want more from your ecosystem.
So now we get to the big difference between our two case studies. At the New York Times, they managed this with the strategy of data containment.
Right? In the Times prestige culture, print was still king, so you didn't see big dashboards with traffic numbers. Instead of a big board, they had the Pulitzer Prize. Wall. Editors kept a really tight lid on who could see the data. They basically monopolized its interpretation.
And it wasn't just about keeping reporters from getting distracted. It was about protecting their own authority. You hear an editor complain that a reporter saw their story on the most emailed list and then argued it should have been on the front page of the print edition.
But the editors still use the numbers just through what we can call strategic disclosure. So they might send an email saying, hey, great traffic on your story, just to boost morale. Or they might show the numbers to a reporter who is a bit of a print snob to encourage them to write more for the website. The information was always managed.
Gawker, of course, took the complete opposite approach. Radical, almost brutal transparency. The metrics were everywhere. On a big board, in the lobby leaderboards for authors. It was a full-on traffic culture.
They even tried to formally delineate the dirty work. They had a dedicated viral beat team, and it was openly understood by everyone that the huge traffic from that team was subsidizing the more serious stories the rest of the site was doing. It allowed other writers to kind of maintain their sense of editorial integrity while still benefiting from the clicks.
This brings us to this really fascinating twist in the story. The coexistence of this intense metric monitoring with a really high sense of autonomy. At Docker, researchers called it the autonomy paradox. When management tried to move away from metric space bonuses toward a system based on an editor's judgment, a system the writers mockingly called the Politburo, the writers fought back. They preferred the numbers.
I mean the Politburo. That's such a charged, cynical term for an editor LED system. Why would they choose that? Because they knew exactly what it meant. Removing the objective metric meant their professional worth was now subject to the subjective, potentially biased whims of a manager. They trusted the numbers more. So how did the numbers give them freedom?
Two main ways. First, logistical autonomy. The metrics basically outsource management. If you were hitting your numbers, nobody bothered you. The classic story is the site lead who secretly moved across the country. And when she finally confessed to the owner, Nick Denton, his response was just immediate. He said the numbers protect you.
The numbers protect you. That says everything, doesn't it? It's the new digital workplace contract. Do the numbers, we leave you alone.
And second, the metrics offered protection against bias for women. For writers of color who maybe felt their work was undervalued by editors, or who got hit with abusive comments online, the numbers were objective proof of their professional worth. They could use high scores to argue for a raise. They could use that data as a shield. One writer celebrated a traffic milestone by saying, "We broke 9,000 concurrents." That is a reminder that I can do this. I'm good at my job.
So the metrics, as intense as they are, can be sort of weaponized by the workers themselves against that subjective judgment. The big institutional takeaway here seems to be that these analytics tools work best in knowledge work when they kind of perform deference to professional judgment. When they allow for that ambiguity, it limits their power to just completely de-skill the worker.
And that struggle, the struggle over the terms of their own quantified labor, it became the ground for real power struggles. You saw this at Gawker. It all culminated in their hugely successful unionization drive in 2015, the first at any major digital media company. They used that shared identity as workers to fight the precarity that the data made so visible to.
To sort of wrap this all up, these digital metrics, they fundamentally forced journalists to work harder, faster. They rationalized the creative process just like Taylorism wanted. But the ambiguity in that data created these unexpected openings for the workers to use those same numbers for their own ends, for autonomy, and eventually for collective action.
That's it exactly. It's a powerful dialectical relationship. The metrics are designed to individualize you, to optimize you. But in doing that, they shine this harsh light on the economic precarity of the job, that constant fight against the clock, against the score. It reminds them that they aren't just high-minded creatives, they're workers. So my final provocative thought for you to consider is this. If these performance metrics can accidentally create a shared experience of labor in journalism, could the spread of similar tools in other fields, think about medicine or education, where professionals are being scored and measured constantly, could that also unintentionally foster solidarity? What does it mean for the next generation of knowledge workers if the very systems designed to manage them end up driving them together? We'll leave you to chew on that one.